So let's do a deep dive into what each one of these artifacts that I just mentioned, what they represent. Again, these are placeholders for potential work that will impact the team or will require team resources. And all of these can impact the velocity. So each type of work item needs to be estimated. We need to know the rough order of magnitude, the level of effort, and they need to be prioritized. So when you're doing your sprint planning or iteration planning, you can select and do a combination of the different types of work items. When you're using a physical Kanban board, oftentimes you use different colored sticky notes to represent your work items. Many tools also have the capacity for you to identify different work type items so that you can differentiate. So at the end, once you accumulate all your different type of work items, you'll have a colorful array of different work items. So when you're also doing your sprint and iteration planning, you also should have a variation of what type of work items. You need to have a balance. Not all sprints will be just user stories. Now let's talk about some of those work items. Technical stories, for example. These are stories that focus on infrastructure type items, or what I also refer to as technical debt. These are some of the background process that support the front end. Many times your user stories represent the user's perspective or the user interface, but we have to have a balance of those back end process. So your backlog should have a healthy number of technical stories or technical debt. Next is non-functional type work items. Again, non-functional work items include things like security or performance, throughput. All of these things also make a successful solution. So although we focus on the front end and the back end with our user stories and our technical stories, we also have to have a healthy balance of non-functional stories. Transitional requirements, as the IIBA defines them, include those things that help during the implementation process of your solution. It could be a conversion, it could be an interface that has to be created. There needs to be work items in your backlog that represent this type of work. Now, documentation. Now, this one is often tricky with people because with Agile, we think no documentation. At least that was the rumor early on. But the reality is that Agile is actually promoting lean documentation when it comes to the requirements. But there's also other documentation, such as user documentation, system documentation, maintenance documentation. And those work items take time, and often from the resources on your team. Therefore, you need to have placeholders for those. So make sure that your team takes into consideration other types of documentation. Oh, and don't forget compliance documentation. Now, another work item is a grooming placeholder. As many of you know, that as you're in your current sprint, you also have new items and requests coming in. That's the beauty of Agile. We embrace change. So as those changes are coming in, we have to evaluate them, make sure they're in scope, and even start adding the acceptance criteria, refining them so that we can do high-level estimates. So that then when we have our conversations and planning and prioritization, they are groomed. So that ongoing grooming of new items that come in or items that get prioritized to the top, you have to balance that with the current sprint. There's different ways of doing those, and one way is to put a placeholder for grooming so that you can make sure you maintain a healthy backlog. And last, let's talk about defects. From time to time, you have changes, corrections, you learn. We know in Agile, we're all about learning quickly. So when you get those defects, if they don't need to go out immediately, they need to have a placeholder so that they can be prioritized along with the other items. So I hope this list has been helpful to you. Thank you for tuning in.